A little girl came to the job interview. The millionaire CEO soon discovers she came in place of her mother, who is hospitalized, and he's left speechless. Before the story begins, wherever life has placed you today, this message is for you. The towering glass headquarters of Meridian Enterprises gleamed in the morning sunlight as Emma Harrison adjusted her backpack and stared up at the 50-story building. At just 7 years old, she stood barely 4 feet tall in her neatly ironed blue dress and white cardigan, her special occasion outfit that Mom had laid out the night before. "You can do this, Emma," she whispered to herself, clutching the worn leather portfolio that contained her mother's resume. Her honey-blonde pigtails bobbed as she nodded with determination. Inside the lobby, executives in tailored suits moved with purpose across polished marble floors. Emma approached the reception desk, standing on tiptoes to see over the counter. "Excuse me," she said, her voice small but clear. "I have a 9 o'clock appointment with Mr. Alexander Reynolds." The receptionist, Diane, according to her nameplate, looked up from her computer with a bewildered expression. "I'm sorry, sweetie. Are you lost? Where are your parents?" Emma straightened her shoulders. "My mom is Rebecca Harrison. She has an interview for the project manager position." She placed the portfolio on the counter. "I'm here in her place." Diane's confusion deepened. "That's not how interviews work, honey. Your mother needs to come herself." "She can't," Emma's voice wavered slightly. "She's in the hospital. They took her last night when she couldn't breathe right. But she really needs this job." A tall man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit had paused nearby, his attention caught by the unusual conversation. Alexander Reynolds, CEO of Meridian Enterprises, was known throughout Chicago's business community for his ruthless efficiency and brilliant strategic mind. What he wasn't known for was changing his schedule for anyone. "Diane, what's the situation here?" His deep voice carried across the lobby. "Mr. Reynolds, this little girl says she's here for the project manager interview in place of her mother." Reynolds approached, studying Emma with piercing blue eyes. At 45, his salt and pepper hair and commanding presence normally intimidated seasoned executives. "Young lady, what's your name?" "Emma Harrison, sir," she replied, meeting his gaze directly. "My mom taught me it's important to look people in the eyes when you speak to them." A hint of amusement flickered across Reynolds's face. "And where exactly is your mother?" "Northwestern Memorial Hospital. She has pneumonia, but the doctors say she'll be okay in a few days." Emma's small fingers unzipped the portfolio. "I brought her resume and her certificates. She stayed up all night working on her presentation before she got sick." Reynolds glanced at his watch, then back at the determined child. Against all logic and corporate protocol, he found himself intrigued. "Emma Harrison," he said, "I've conducted over 5,000 interviews in my career, but this is certainly a first." He extended his hand. "Come up to my office. Let's hear what your mother had prepared." Diane's mouth fell open as Reynolds guided Emma toward the executive elevator. "Sir," Emma said as the doors closed, "Mom says I'm too young to drink coffee, but I know how to make it if you'd like some." For the first time in years, Alexander Reynolds laughed genuinely. He had no idea this unexpected meeting would change everything. Alexander Reynolds gestured for Emma to take a seat in the plush chair across from his expansive desk. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a wall of achievements and business magazine covers featuring his stern face. "So, Emma," he said, watching as she carefully arranged her mother's portfolio on her lap, "tell me about your mother's qualifications." Emma opened the leather binder with practiced care. "Mom has been a project manager for 8 years. She worked at Westlake Solutions until they closed last month." Her small finger traced the resume. "She has a PMP certification and an MBA from Northwestern." Reynolds raised an eyebrow, impressed by the child's vocabulary. "And why does your mother want to work at Meridian?" "Because we need the health insurance," Emma answered honestly. "And because she says your company does important work that helps people." The directness of her response caught Reynolds off guard. Most candidates danced around compensation discussions with rehearsed speeches about company culture and growth opportunities. "Mom's really good at her job," Emma continued, pulling out a folder of project completion reports. "These are her success stories. She stayed up making this presentation even though she was getting sick." Reynolds flipped through the meticulously prepared materials, noting Rebecca Harrison's impressive track record. "Who's taking care of you while your mother is in the hospital?" Emma's expression faltered slightly. "Mrs. Winters from next door checked on me this morning, but she's really old. I can take care of myself. I make my own lunch for school." A heaviness settled in Reynolds's chest. "Where is your father?" "He left when I was a baby. Mom says he wasn't ready to be a dad." Emma shrugged as if discussing the weather. "It's just us, but we're a good team." Reynolds studied the child before him, poised, articulate, and carrying responsibilities far beyond her years. Something about her determination stirred long-dormant memories. "One moment," he said, pressing his intercom. "Janet, cancel my morning meetings." His assistant's shocked voice came through the speaker. "Sir, you have the board presentation at 11 o'clock. Reschedule it and find out which doctor is treating Rebecca Harrison at Northwestern Memorial." Emma's eyes widened. "Are you going to visit my mom?" "We are," Reynolds replied, standing. "I need to meet the woman who raised such an extraordinary representative." As they rode the elevator down, Emma looked up at him curiously. "Mr. Reynolds, why are you helping us?" "Mom says busy, important people don't usually have time." The question pierced him unexpectedly. Why indeed? Reynolds had built his reputation on efficiency and results, not compassion. "Let's just say you've managed to do what most of my executives can't, get my full attention." Emma smiled, revealing a missing front tooth, and slipped her small hand into his. The simple gesture of trust stunned him. Neither realized this moment would be the first step in healing wounds they didn't know they shared. Northwestern Memorial Hospital bustled with activity as Alexander Reynolds and Emma walked through the main entrance. The CEO looked starkly out of place in his bespoke suit among the medical staff in scrubs, but he moved with the same authority he commanded in boardrooms. "Room 317, the nurse at the station directed after checking her computer. "But sir, visiting hours don't start until," Reynolds slid his business card across the counter. "I need to speak with Miss Harrison about an urgent business matter." Emma led the way, navigating the corridors with familiar ease that troubled Reynolds. How many times had this child walked hospital halls alone? They found Rebecca Harrison propped up in bed, her chestnut hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and 4-line in her arm. Though clearly ill, her face pale and dark circles beneath her eyes, her resemblance to Emma was striking. "Emma?" Rebecca's voice was hoarse. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be with Mrs. Winters." Her eyes widened as she noticed Reynolds. "Oh my God. Mom, this is Mr. Reynolds. I went to your interview, and he brought me to see you." Rebecca's face drained of what little color it had. "You did what?" Reynolds stepped forward. "Miss Harrison, your daughter made quite an impression. She presented your portfolio with remarkable poise." "I am so sorry," Rebecca struggled to sit up straighter, mortification evident. "Emma, we talked about this. You were supposed to call the company to reschedule, not go there yourself." "But you worked so hard on your presentation," Emma protested. "And we need the job." The raw honesty silenced the room. Reynolds pulled a chair beside the bed. "Ms. Harrison, your daughter mentioned you were at Westlake until recently." Rebecca nodded, still bewildered by the situation. "Yes, I was there for 5 years before the acquisition and downsizing." "Your portfolio is impressive. Why haven't you secured a position elsewhere with your qualifications?" Rebecca glanced at Emma, hesitating. "It's complicated. Single parent, no family support system. Most employers see that as a liability." They ask if I'll miss work when Emma gets sick, she continued, her voice strengthening with frustration. They never directly say it, but their concerns become clear. 8 interviews, 8 rejections in 2 months. Reynolds watched as Emma climbed onto the bed, instinctively checking her mother's 4-line with the familiarity of someone who had done it before. The medical bills aren't helping, Rebecca admitted quietly. Pneumonia couldn't have come at a worse time. A memory surfaced in Reynolds's mind, one he'd long suppressed, a woman much like Rebecca, struggling alone, determined to provide despite overwhelming odds. Miss Harrison, Reynolds said, his decision already forming, how soon can you recover? The doctor says I can leave tomorrow if my oxygen levels improve, but I won't be at full strength for a week. Then we'll conduct your official interview next Monday. In the meantime, he reached into his jacket, producing a business card, have the hospital billing department contact this number. Rebecca stared at the card. Mr. Reynolds, I can't accept, consider it an advance. Meridian takes care of its people. As they left, Emma whispered, thank you for helping my mom. Reynolds wondered why her gratitude felt more valuable than his last $1 million deal. For the next 5 days, Emma became a fixture at Meridian Enterprises. With Rebecca's reluctant permission, after Reynolds arranged for a car service and proper supervision, Emma spent her afternoons in an empty corner office near Reynolds's suite, doing homework and occasionally shadowing various departments. Your operating margins could improve by reorganizing your supply chain, Emma announced on Wednesday afternoon, looking up from her math homework as Reynolds stopped by to check on her. He couldn't help but smile. Is that so? And where did you learn about operating margins? Mom explains her work to me. She says it helps her think better when she talks it out. Emma tapped her pencil against her notebook. Also, your receptionist, Diane, gives me business magazines when I get bored. Reynolds leaned against the door frame. Most 7-year-olds read comic books. I read those, too. Batman is my favorite because he helps people and doesn't need superpowers. An unexpected laugh escaped him, a pragmatist already. By Thursday, Reynolds's executive team had noticed their CEO's unusual behavior. Janet, his assistant of 15 years, observed him checking his watch before Emma's scheduled arrival each day. She reminds you of someone, Janet remarked, placing budget reports on his desk. Reynolds stiffened. She's a child with remarkable potential. That's all. If you say so. Janet had been with him long enough to recognize the shadows that occasionally darkened his eyes. The board is asking questions about your canceled meetings. The board can direct their questions to me, he replied curtly. Later that afternoon, Reynolds found Emma in the break room, charming the marketing team with her insights on their latest campaign. Kids at my school would like the colors more if they were brighter, she was saying as the marketing director took notes. Miss Harrison, Reynolds interrupted, I believe it's time for your appointment. It had become their ritual, a daily review of her mother's recovery and a discussion about what Emma had learned at Meridian that day. In his office, Emma settled into what had become her chair. Mom's coming home tomorrow. The nurse said her lungs sound much better. That's excellent news, Reynolds replied, sliding a chocolate milk across the desk, another part of their routine. Will you still want to see me after Mom starts working here? Emma asked suddenly, her eyes serious over the rim of her glass. The question caught him off guard. What makes you think I wouldn't? Emma shrugged, looking down. Dad didn't want to see me anymore. Sometimes people just stop wanting kids around. The simple statement struck Reynolds like a physical blow. In his 45 years, he'd faced hostile takeovers, market crashes, and betrayals by trusted colleagues. Yet nothing had prepared him for the disarming honesty of a 7-year-old. Emma, he said carefully, some people leave because of their own failings, not because of anything you did. He hadn't meant to share the photograph that day. It had remained locked in his desk drawer for nearly 2 decades. Yet something compelled him to open the drawer and remove the silver frame. This was my daughter, he said, turning the frame toward Emma. Her name was Lily. Emma studied the photo of a smiling toddler with Reynolds's blue eyes. Where is she now? Reynolds's voice grew distant. She and her mother died in an accident a long time ago. Is that why you're sad sometimes when you look at me? The question hung in the air like crystal, fragile and perfectly clear. Absolutely not. Victoria Sloan, Meridian's HR director, stood with arms crossed in Reynolds's office Friday morning. I've reviewed Rebecca Harrison's application. While her qualifications are adequate, her situation presents significant liability concerns. Reynolds continued reviewing documents, his expression impassive. Elaborate. Single mother, no family support, recent medical issues, Victoria ticked off on manicured fingers. She's missed work repeatedly at previous positions due to child care emergencies. The statistical probability of attendance problems is high. Reynolds set down his pen. Have you reviewed her performance evaluations? Yes, consistently exceeds expectations, Victoria conceded. But that doesn't outweigh the practical concerns. We have equally qualified candidates without her. Complications. Complications? Reynolds's voice cooled several degrees. An intelligent, dedicated professional who successfully manages both her career and raising a remarkably well-adjusted child strikes you as complicated? Victoria shifted uncomfortably. Alexander, this isn't like you. The board is already questioning your judgment over this unusual interest. There are rumors. Rumors don't concern me. Results do. He handed her Rebecca's portfolio. Her project management methodology saved Westlake $3 million last year. That's the only relevant factor. Later that afternoon, James Whitfield, Reynolds's oldest friend and Meridian's CFO, closed the office door behind him. Alex, we need to talk. Reynolds glanced up from his computer. If this is about Rebecca Harrison, it is, James confirmed, settling into a chair. But not for the reasons you think. He studied his friend's face. This isn't just about finding a qualified project manager, is it? Reynolds's jaw tightened. Her qualifications speak for themselves. I've known you for 30 years, James said quietly. Not since Caroline and Lily have I seen you like this. Don't, Reynolds warned. James continued gently. You've built walls so high that the board calls you the machine behind your back. Then this child walks in, and suddenly you're canceling meetings and arranging hospital payments. What's your point, James? My point is that you need to be careful, not just professionally, but personally. James leaned forward. If you're seeing ghosts of what might have been, that's a vulnerable place to operate from. Reynolds turned to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Did you know Emma makes her own lunch? Has since she was 5. She checks her mother's medication schedule and knows how to navigate hospital billing departments. He shook his head. She's 7, James. And Lily would have been 19 this year, James said softly. The silence that followed was answer enough. After James left, Reynolds opened his desk drawer and retrieved the silver frame again. Caroline's laughing face looked back at him as she held 2-year-old Lily on her lap. What would you think of my becoming involved in this situation? He asked the photograph. Am I seeing ghosts, or an opportunity to finally do something right? As always, the photograph offered no answers, only memories of what he'd lost and the crushing weight of how he'd failed them. The intercom buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. Sir, Rebecca Harrison is here. She was released from the hospital this morning and asked to see you. Reynolds carefully returned the photograph to its drawer. Send her in. What happened next would determine whether his executive team's concerns were justified or whether something extraordinary was beginning. Rebecca Harrison stood in Reynolds's office, significantly improved from her hospital appearance but still bearing the pallor of recent illness. She wore a simple navy blue suit, clearly her best, though several years out of current fashion. Mr. Reynolds, she began, her voice steady despite her evident nervousness, "I came to thank you personally for your kindness toward Emma and for handling the hospital bills. I'll arrange a repayment plan. Please sit." Reynolds gestured to the chair across from him. "No repayment is necessary. Consider it an investment." Rebecca sat, her posture perfect despite her discomfort. "An investment requires returns, Mr. Reynolds. I haven't proven my value yet." "Your daughter has been quite the ambassador," he replied with unexpected warmth. "The marketing team is implementing her color suggestions, and the breakroom staff has added chocolate milk to the regular order." A smile briefly brightened Rebecca's tired face. "Emma has that effect on people. She's always been able to talk to anyone." Her expression grew serious. "But I need to apologize for putting you in this position." She was supposed to call and reschedule the interview, not attend it herself. "Yet here we are," Reynolds observed. "Sometimes the most significant opportunities arise from broken protocols." He studied her for a moment. "Your official interview is scheduled for Monday, but I'd like to discuss something different today." Rebecca tensed slightly. "Of course." Reynolds leaned forward. "Why do you continue pursuing corporate positions when they've repeatedly rejected you because of your family situation?" The blunt question hung in the air between them. Rebecca's eyes flashed with momentary anger, then determination. "Because I refuse to let my daughter believe that being a mother makes me less valuable professionally. Because I'm excellent at what I do, regardless of my personal circumstances." She straightened in her chair. "And frankly, because I need comprehensive health insurance more than inspirational workplace culture or ping-pong tables in the break room." Reynolds nodded slowly. "Practical priorities. I respect that." He paused, then asked, "If hired, how would you handle the inevitable emergencies, Emma's illnesses, school closures?" "The same way I've always handled them, with contingency plans and backup systems," Rebecca answered without hesitation. "I maintain relationships with 3 reliable babysitters, 2 after-school programs, and a network of other working parents for emergencies." She leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Reynolds, I understand your concerns. Every employer has them. But what they fail to recognize is that single parents are the most efficient workers you'll ever find. We don't have time for office politics or extended lunches. We prioritize ruthlessly and maximize every minute because we have to." Reynolds studied her, impressed by her candor. Then he made a decision that would change Meridian's culture forever. "Ms. Harrison, I'd like to offer you the position, with one significant modification to the standard package." He slid a folder across the desk. "This outlines a pilot program I'm implementing, flexible work arrangements with emergency childcare support for employees with family responsibilities." Rebecca stared at the folder. "You're creating this because of me." "No," Reynolds said quietly. "I'm creating it because 17 years ago, my wife Caroline tried to return to work after our daughter was born. Every company she approached saw only complications, not her brilliance." He looked directly at Rebecca. "I was too absorbed in building Meridian to notice how it destroyed her." The revelation hung in the air between them. "What happened?" Rebecca asked softly. Reynolds's face darkened with old pain. "She was driving to yet another interview when a truck crossed the median. Emma reminds me of what Lily might have become." Understanding dawned in Rebecca's eyes. "That's why you helped us." "Initially, perhaps," he acknowledged, "but your daughter's determination and your qualifications stand on their own merits." He extended his hand. "The position is yours if you want it." As Rebecca shook his hand, neither could have predicted how this decision would transform not just their lives, but the lives of countless working parents at Meridian Enterprises in the years to come. 2 months after Rebecca Harrison joined Meridian Enterprises, the company's dynamics had subtly shifted. Rebecca's project management expertise quickly proved invaluable, her methodical approach streamlining operations across multiple departments. The pilot program for flexible work arrangements had expanded beyond her position, with 5 other employees now participating in what Reynolds had officially named the Family Forward Initiative. The quarterly projections show a 12% increase in productivity from participating team members, Rebecca explained during her presentation to the executive board. She stood confidently at the head of the conference table, her slides displaying clear metrics. Retention rates are up, and sick leave usage has actually decreased. Victoria Sloan, the HR director who had initially opposed Rebecca's hiring, watched with thinly veiled skepticism. 2 months is hardly enough time to determine long-term viability, she noted. What happens when the novelty wears off? That's why we're tracking weekly metrics rather than quarterly, Rebecca countered smoothly. We can identify and address issues in real time rather than discovering problems months later. Reynolds observed the exchange with satisfaction. Rebecca had proven herself not just competent but exceptional, deftly navigating corporate politics while delivering consistent results. The initiative stays, he announced, ending further debate. Rebecca, expand the program to include 15 more positions by next quarter. Later that afternoon, Reynolds found Emma in what had become her regular spot, a small desk in the corner of Rebecca's office, where she worked on homework after school. The arrangement had raised eyebrows initially, but Reynolds had made it clear that children of employees were welcome in designated areas when necessary. Mr. Reynolds, Emma looked up from her science project, Mom's helping Mr. Davidson fix the supply chain problem, just like I said. Reynolds smiled. So I heard. Your mother is quite impressive. She always was, Emma replied matter-of-factly. People just didn't notice before. The simple observation struck Reynolds as profoundly true. How many talented individuals had corporate America overlooked because their circumstances didn't fit the traditional mold? Emma, he said, sitting in the chair beside her desk, how would you feel about helping me with a special project? Her eyes widened with interest. What kind of project? I'm thinking about creating a space here at Meridian for children whose parents work late. Sort of like a homework and activity center. What would make it a good place for kids your age? Emma considered this seriously. Books at different reading levels, quiet spaces and group spaces, healthy snacks, not just cookies, even though cookies are the best, and maybe college students to help with homework. Reynolds pulled out his notebook and began writing. What about during school holidays? For the next hour, CEO and Child mapped out what would eventually become Meridian's renowned Bridge program, an on-site childcare and educational support system that would revolutionize work-life integration in corporate America. That evening, as Rebecca finished her work, she found Reynolds and Emma deep in conversation, surrounded by drawings and notes. Should I be concerned about this conspiracy? She asked with amusement. Mom, we're designing a kid space for Meridian, Emma exclaimed. Rebecca raised an eyebrow at Reynolds. That sounds expensive. It's an investment, he corrected. One that will pay dividends for years to come. As they walked to the elevator together, Rebecca studied Reynolds's profile. You've changed since we first met, she observed. For better or worse? Definitely better, she replied. The staff doesn't call you the machine anymore. Reynolds looked surprised. You heard about that? Office gossip travels fast, Rebecca smiled. Now they're calling you the revolutionary instead. As the elevator doors closed, Reynolds reflected that some revolutions began not with grand manifestos, but with a child's simple question: why can't things be different? What no one at Meridian realized was that the company's transformation had attracted unwanted attention from those who preferred the status quo, and they were preparing to strike back. The quarterly board meeting began like any other, with financial reports and strategic planning updates. Alexander Reynolds sat at the head of the table, listening as James Whitfield presented the latest figures. Overall revenue is up 7% from this time last year, James reported. Particularly notable is the 22% increase in productivity from departments participating in the Family Forward initiative. Several board members nodded approvingly, but Gerald Harrington, the oldest member of the board and former CEO of Meridian, cleared his throat pointedly. While these figures are impressive, I've been hearing concerns about company culture, Harrington said, his voice carrying the weight of his 30 years with Meridian. There's a perception that we're becoming a daycare center rather than a premier financial services firm. Reynolds kept his expression neutral. Would you care to elaborate? Children in the workplace, flexible schedules, remote work options, Harrington listed. These may appeal to a certain demographic, but our core clients expect stability and tradition. Morgan Stanley isn't bringing sippy cups to client meetings. Victoria Sloan nodded in agreement. I've had several complaints from senior staff about noise and disruption. Just yesterday, a junior analyst was spotted playing catch with a child in the East Corridor. That was my daughter, Reynolds said quietly. The catch was a mathematics game I developed to help with her multiplication tables. The room fell silent. Alex, Harrington leaned forward, his tone softening to one of paternalistic concern. No one questions your authority to implement new programs, but there are whispers about your personal investment in the Harrison situation. People are questioning your objectivity. Reynolds felt a familiar coldness settle over him, the emotional armor he'd worn for years before Emma and Rebecca entered his life. My personal investments are irrelevant. The metrics speak for themselves, he replied evenly. If our goal is maximizing shareholder value, the initiative has proven its worth. The tension in the room eased slightly, but Reynolds knew this was merely the opening salvo in what would become a prolonged battle. After the meeting, James lingered behind. Gerald's not alone in his concerns, Alex. Victoria's been gathering ammunition, documenting every minor incident involving children on the premises, tracking any project delays from flexible workers. Let her, Reynolds replied. The data supports our position. This isn't just about data, James warned. It's about power and perception. Gerald still has significant influence with the older board members. They see these changes as a rejection of the company they built. Reynolds gathered his papers. Perhaps it's time the company they built evolved. That evening, Reynolds found himself driving to Rebecca's modest townhouse in Lincoln Park instead of heading home to his penthouse. He'd been invited for dinner, a simple thank you for his mentorship of Emma, Rebecca had insisted. The domestic scene that greeted him was a stark contrast to the corporate battlefield he'd left behind. Emma answered the door, proudly wearing an apron and announcing she'd helped make the lasagna. The small home was warm and cluttered with evidence of a life fully lived, books stacked on end tables, a science project taking up half the dining table, framed artwork clearly created by Emma's hand. Sorry about the mess, Rebecca apologized, emerging from the kitchen. We weren't expecting the science fair project to involve quite so much expansion. It's a volcano, Emma explained excitedly. It actually erupts. Reynolds found himself smiling genuinely. I'll be sure to stand back during the demonstration. During dinner, he found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did. The conversation flowed easily, from Emma's school adventures to Rebecca's projects at work, without the careful calculation that characterized most of his interactions. You're different here, Rebecca observed after Emma had gone to finish homework. More human. Reynolds considered this. I've spent decades cultivating a specific professional persona. It becomes habit. It becomes armor, she corrected gently. I recognize it because I've worn similar protection. Single mom in corporate America, you develop a shell. Something about her perception unsettled and comforted him simultaneously. The board is pushing back against the changes, he admitted. They're using you and Emma as evidence that I've lost objectivity. Rebecca's expression tightened. I can request a transfer to another department. Distance myself from the initiative. Absolutely not, Reynolds interrupted. That would validate their criticism. What he didn't say, couldn't articulate even to himself, was how unacceptable he found the idea of Rebecca and Emma moving further from his daily orbit. Just be prepared, he warned. Corporate politics can turn vicious quickly. Rebecca's smile held unexpected steel. Mr. Reynolds, I've been a single mother for 7 years. There's nothing corporate America can throw at me that's more challenging than raising a child alone while working full-time. As he drove home later, Reynolds realized he'd shared more about the board's inner workings with Rebecca than he had with most executives. More troubling was the realization that the prospect of losing his professional reputation, something that had once been his primary concern, paled in comparison to the thought of losing the tentative connection he'd formed with Rebecca and Emma. He was still contemplating this shift when his phone rang with news that would accelerate the coming conflict beyond anyone's expectations. "Mr. Reynolds, you need to see this immediately." Janet's voice carried unusual urgency as she placed a tablet on his desk the following morning. The headline from the Wall Street Journal's business section blared, "Meridian CEO's Personal Crusade, Business Innovation or Midlife Crisis?" The accompanying article featured quotes from anonymous sources within Meridian, describing Reynolds's unusual attachment to a female employee and her child and questioning whether his judgment had been compromised by unresolved personal trauma. The article specifically mentioned the Family Forward initiative, painting it as a costly distraction from Meridian's core business, driven by Reynolds's personal agenda rather than sound business strategy. "Who leaked this?" Reynolds asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Impossible to say for certain," Janet replied. "But the details about your wife and daughter, very few people have access to that information." Reynolds's phone began ringing, board members, major clients, and industry contacts, all demanding explanations. By noon, Meridian's stock had dropped 3 points, and the PR department was in crisis mode. Victoria Sloan appeared at his office, her expression a carefully constructed mask of concern. "The board has called an emergency meeting for 4 p.m. They're requesting your presence, and," she paused meaningfully, "they've specifically asked that Rebecca Harrison attend as well." "On what grounds?" Reynolds demanded. "They didn't share that information with me," Victoria replied with practiced innocence. "I'm simply delivering the message." After she left, Reynolds immediately called Rebecca to warn her. "I've already seen the article," she said, her voice tight. "Emma's teacher called me. Some of the parents are discussing it. It's affecting my daughter now, Alexander." The use of his first name, something she'd never done before, registered the seriousness of the situation. "Rebecca, I'm sorry. I never intended," "I know," she interrupted, "but intention doesn't matter much when my 7-year-old is hearing whispers about her mother's relationship with her boss." The implication struck him like a physical blow. "The article doesn't suggest, not directly," Rebecca agreed. "But it plants the idea. You know how these things work." When they arrived separately at the emergency board meeting, the atmosphere was glacial. Gerald Harrington sat at the center of the table, flanked by Victoria and several of the more conservative board members. James Whitfield sat alone on the opposite side, his presence a silent statement of support for Reynolds. "We'll get straight to the point," Harrington began once everyone was seated. "This morning's article has caused significant damage to Meridian's reputation and shareholder value. Our phones have been ringing all day with concerned clients and investors." Reynolds remained outwardly calm. "Media speculation is hardly unprecedented. Our PR team is already addressing the inaccuracies." "The concern isn't just the media coverage," Victoria interjected smoothly. "It's the underlying issue of judgment and priorities." She turned to Rebecca. "Ms. Harrison, no one questions your professional qualifications. However, the special circumstances of your hiring and the subsequent development of company policy around your personal situation have created a perception problem." Rebecca's spine straightened. "My personal situation being that I'm a single parent, or that my daughter showed remarkable initiative in ensuring her mother didn't miss an opportunity? Which aspect exactly is problematic for Meridian's image?" Several board members shifted uncomfortably. "The issue," Harrington continued, "is the appearance of favoritism and the rapid implementation of policies that fundamentally alter our corporate culture without proper vetting." He slid a document across the table toward Reynolds. "We're proposing a temporary suspension of the Family Forward initiative pending comprehensive review and the reassignment of Miss Harrison to the Cleveland office to eliminate any appearance of impropriety." Reynolds didn't touch the document. Reassignment would be constructive dismissal, and you know it. Her daughter is established in school here. We would, of course, provide relocation assistance, Victoria added. Rebecca's voice cut through the tension. May I ask who leaked the personal information about Mr. Reynolds's family tragedy to the press? The room fell silent. That's not relevant to these proceedings, Harrington replied stiffly. I disagree, Rebecca countered. It speaks directly to the ethical standards of this board. Someone in this room used deeply personal information as a weapon in a corporate power struggle. That seems extremely relevant to how Meridian conducts business. James Whitfield leaned forward. I agree with Miss Harrison. Before we discuss any policy changes or personnel reassignments, we should address the breach of confidentiality that precipitated this crisis. Victoria's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. We have no evidence that anyone on the board. We do, Reynolds interrupted. He nodded to Janet, who had been standing quietly by the door. She distributed copies of an email chain to each board member. This morning, IT traced the source of the leak. The information was sent from Victoria's email account to a journalist at the Wall Street Journal 3 days ago. All eyes turned to Victoria, whose face had drained of color. This is preposterous, she sputtered. My email was obviously hacked, by someone who knew your authentication details and had access to confidential personnel files. Reynolds asked mildly. That seems unlikely. For the first time since the meeting began, Reynolds allowed himself a small smile. I anticipated this maneuver, though not quite so soon. The email contains metadata that confirms its authenticity and origin. Victoria, you're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you to clear your office. Harrington's face had turned an alarming shade of red. You can't unilaterally fire an executive without board approval. Actually, I can, Reynolds corrected. Ethics violations of this magnitude fall under my direct authority as CEO, unless, of course, you were involved as well, Gerald. The older man deflated visibly. Of course not. I would never. Good, Reynolds interrupted. Then, as acting chairman, I move that we conclude this emergency meeting and reconvene tomorrow after everyone has had time to review the evidence properly. As the board members filed out, some looking shell-shocked and others secretly pleased at Victoria's downfall, Rebecca remained seated. You knew this was coming, she observed once they were alone. Reynolds nodded. I suspected Victoria would make a move eventually. She's opposed every progressive policy change for years, not just the ones involving you. Why didn't you warn me? There was hurt beneath her professional composure. Because your genuine reaction was crucial. If you'd been prepared, someone might have suspected collusion. He hesitated. I am sorry about the impact on Emma, though. That I didn't anticipate. Rebecca gathered her papers. She's stronger than you think, than anyone thinks. She paused at the door. For what it's worth, I believe in what you're trying to build here, a company where success doesn't require sacrificing family. It's long overdue. As she left, Reynolds realized that the corporate victory felt hollow compared to the personal trust he might have damaged. The battle had been won, but the war, both professional and personal, was far from over. 3 weeks after Victoria's dismissal, the controversy had mostly subsided. Meridian's stock had recovered, the media had moved on to fresher scandals, and the Family Forward initiative had not only continued but expanded to include 25 positions across various departments. Rebecca's management of the program had been exemplary, with comprehensive metrics tracking both productivity and employee satisfaction. Even former skeptics on the board had begun to acknowledge the business case for the initiative, particularly as competing firms began implementing similar programs to keep pace with Meridian's innovation. Everything was proceeding smoothly until the day Gerald Harrington walked into Reynolds's office unannounced, closing the door firmly behind him. We need to talk, Alex, he said without preamble, about your future with Meridian. Reynolds leaned back in his chair. I wasn't aware my future was in question. Harrington placed a thick folder on the desk between them. The board has been conducting a review of company leadership and succession planning, standard procedure for any corporation of our size. Reynolds prompted, though he already sensed where this was heading, and there are concerns about your long-term vision for Meridian. The changes you've implemented recently, while well-intentioned, represent a significant departure from the company's established identity. Reynolds opened the folder to find a formal proposal for his transition to an advisory role over the next 6 months, with Harrington returning as interim CEO while a search for permanent leadership was conducted. "I see," Reynolds said quietly. A carefully orchestrated coup. Harrington had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That's unnecessarily dramatic, Alex. No one questions your contributions to Meridian. The company has thrived under your leadership for 15 years. But perhaps it's time for what, Gerald? A return to the policies of the past? Discarding innovations that are demonstrably improving both our bottom line and our employees' lives? For balance," Harrington corrected. "For ensuring that, in your personal journey of healing, you don't reshape an entire corporation around your individual regrets." The word struck with precision, finding the vulnerability Reynolds had carefully concealed. "My personal journey is irrelevant," he replied coldly. "The metrics support every change I've implemented." Harrington sighed. "Numbers aren't everything, Alex. Culture matters. Tradition matters. The expectations of our long-standing clients matter." He paused. "And your relationship with the Harrison family has created complications that extend beyond metrics." "I don't have a relationship with the Harrison family," Reynolds countered, though even to his own ears, the denial sounded hollow. "Don't you?" Harrington asked quietly. "You've been photographed at the child's school events. You've had dinner at their home multiple times. You've created an entire corporate initiative that began with accommodating their specific situation. I've supported a valuable employee and recognized the potential for broader application of that support," Reynolds corrected. "Any personal connection is secondary." Harrington studied him for a long moment. "The board meeting is Friday at 2 p.m. You have until then to consider the transition proposal. If you fight this, Alex, it will get ugly. The press will dig deeper into your personal history, into your interest in the Harrisons. Do you really want Emma caught in that crossfire again?" After Harrington left, Reynolds sat motionless, considering his options. He could fight, he still had allies on the board, and the performance numbers were on his side. But Harrington was right about one thing: a public battle would inevitably draw Rebecca and Emma back into the spotlight. As if summoned by his thoughts, there was a gentle knock at his door, and Emma peeked in. "Mr. Reynolds, Mom said I could show you my science fair results." She bounded in, carrying a blue ribbon and photographs of her volcanic eruption experiment. For the next 15 minutes, Reynolds listened attentively as Emma explained the chemical reactions involved in her project, her face alight with enthusiasm for discovery. The corporate machinations that had occupied his morning seemed distant and somehow less consequential in the face of her uncomplicated joy. "Emma," he said when she paused for breath, "what would you think if I wasn't working at Meridian anymore?" Her expression grew serious. "Are you going to a different company?" "I might," he answered honestly. "Or I might start something new." Emma considered this carefully. "Would we still see you?" "Mom says you're her mentor, but I think you're our friend, too." The simple question crystallized the decision he'd been avoiding for weeks. His position at Meridian, the company he'd built, the professional identity he'd cultivated for decades, suddenly seemed less essential than the connection he'd formed with this remarkable child and her mother. "Yes," he said firmly, "we would definitely still see each other." Later that evening, Reynolds called Rebecca. "I need to discuss something important. Can we meet tomorrow?" "Is this about Harrington's ultimatum?" she asked, surprising him with her awareness. "How did you know?" "The executive floor has thin walls, and Janet keeps me informed," Rebecca replied. "She's quite protective of you." Reynolds smiled despite himself. Apparently, I'm the last to know about the coup, then. Not a coup yet, Rebecca corrected. Just an attempted one. She paused. Alexander, whatever you're planning, please don't make decisions based on protecting Emma and me. We've survived corporate politics before. It's not just about protecting you, he admitted. It's about deciding what matters more, the company I've built or the future I could build. The silence between them held possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. Come for dinner tomorrow, Rebecca finally said. Emma's making her famous spaghetti. We can talk after she goes to bed. As Reynolds hung up, he realized that, for the first time since losing Caroline and Lily, he was making decisions based not on past regrets, but on future hopes. Whatever happened with Meridian, something fundamental had shifted in his life's orientation, from looking back to looking forward. What he couldn't possibly know was that the following day would bring a revelation that would change everything. The manila envelope arrived by courier at 10:37 a.m., marked personal and confidential, for Alexander Reynolds. Janet placed it on his desk with a curious glance but asked no questions, one of the many reasons he valued her discretion. Inside, Reynolds found documents from Gerald Harrington's private files, copies of board meeting minutes from 18 years ago, personnel records, and internal memos. A post-it note simply read, "You should know what you're really fighting against. A friend." As Reynolds read through the materials, his hands began to shake. The documents revealed a systematic policy implemented during Harrington's tenure as CEO, one that specifically targeted the hiring and retention of women of childbearing age, particularly those already with children. One memo from Harrington to the then HR director read, "While we cannot explicitly discriminate, we can implement performance metrics that naturally disadvantage those with family obligations. This ensures our workforce remains focused and unencumbered." Another document showed a list of female employees who had become pregnant while at Meridian, with notations tracking their eventual departures, all within 18 months of returning from maternity leave. The pattern was undeniable and deliberate. Most disturbing was a specific mention of Caroline Reynolds in a board presentation from 2 decades earlier. "Wife of our CFO Alexander Reynolds has requested part-time return from maternity leave. Recommend denial as it would set problematic precedent." Reynolds sat back, memories crashing over him like waves. Caroline's increasing frustration as she tried to return to work after Lily's birth, her depression when firm after firm rejected her flexible work proposals, the arguments they'd had when he'd suggested she simply stay home with Lily, like other executives' wives. The final document in the package was a newspaper clipping about the accident that had killed Caroline and Lily, with a handwritten note in what appeared to be Harrington's writing, "Tragic outcome. Ensure AR remains focused on work. Best distraction from grief." Reynolds's vision blurred with a combination of rage and grief. All these years, he'd blamed himself for being too absorbed in building Meridian to support Caroline properly. He'd never considered that his mentor, Harrington, had actively blocked her professional return. When Rebecca called to confirm dinner plans, Reynolds's voice was strange enough to concern her. "What's happened?" she asked immediately. "I need to show you something," he replied. "Can you meet me at the office first? It's important." An hour later, Rebecca sat across from him, the damning documents spread between them on his desk. "This is," she began, then faltered. "Systematic discrimination," Reynolds finished, "deliberately designed to push out working mothers while maintaining plausible deniability." Rebecca studied the documents carefully, her professional composure giving way to visible anger. "And Harrington was behind this, the same man who's trying to oust you for being too progressive. Not just behind it, he created it, implemented it, and apparently took pride in its effectiveness." Reynolds met her eyes, "including with my wife, Caroline." Understanding dawned in Rebecca's expression. "That's why this has been so personal for you. The Family Forward initiative isn't just about efficiency or even doing the right thing. It's about redemption." Reynolds admitted quietly, "Correcting a wrong I didn't even know existed until today." Rebecca reached across the desk, briefly touching his hand, the first time she had initiated physical contact between them. "Alexander," this changes everything. The board needs to see these documents. Harrington has too many allies, Reynolds countered. They'll claim these are old policies, no longer relevant. They'll minimize and rationalize. Then we don't just show the board, Rebecca said, determination hardening her voice. We show everyone. What do you mean? Transparency, she explained. Complete corporate transparency about past failures and current corrections. We publish a comprehensive report on Meridian's historical practices regarding working parents, acknowledge the failures, and detail the measurable improvements under the Family Forward initiative. Reynolds considered the implications. That would be unprecedented. Exactly, Rebecca nodded. No corporation willingly exposes its past mistakes this way. By doing so, we position Meridian not as perfect, but as courageously committed to progress. It's not just corporate policy, it becomes a movement. As they discussed strategy late into the afternoon, Reynolds found himself admiring not just Rebecca's professional insight, but her moral clarity. She approached the situation not as a victim of discrimination, but as a strategist determined to create systemic change. There's one more thing, Reynolds said as they prepared to leave for dinner. These documents don't just change how we approach the board meeting. They change my understanding of the past 17 years of my life. Rebecca studied his face. What will you do with that understanding? I don't know yet, he admitted, but for the first time since losing them, I feel like I might be on the path Caroline would have wanted. That evening at Rebecca's townhouse, Reynolds watched as Emma proudly served her spaghetti dinner, complete with garlic bread she'd helped prepare. The domestic scene struck him with an unexpected poignancy. This was what he'd missed all these years, what he'd walled himself off from after losing his family. After Emma went to bed, Rebecca poured 2 glasses of wine and joined Reynolds on the small balcony overlooking the neighborhood park. Tomorrow will be challenging, she said quietly. Harrington won't go down without a fight. I'm prepared for that, Reynolds replied. What I'm less prepared for is what comes after. Rebecca turned to face him fully. What do you mean? Reynolds chose his words carefully. For 17 years, I've defined myself by what I lost and by what I built to distract from that loss. Meridian became my identity because I had nothing else. He paused. But these past few months, watching you with Emma, being included in your lives, I've started to remember there are other ways to measure success. Alexander, Rebecca began cautiously, whatever happens with Meridian, you've created real change. That will help countless families. That matters. It does, he agreed. But I'm beginning to think that what matters more is being present for the people in front of you, not just building systems that might help anonymous families in the future. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but increasingly clear. We should focus on tomorrow's battle first, Rebecca finally said, though her eyes held questions about possibilities beyond the corporate conflict. Reynolds nodded, respecting her careful boundaries. You're right. One transformation at a time. As he prepared to leave, Emma appeared in the hallway in her pajamas, ostensibly for a glass of water, but clearly curious about the adult conversation. Mr. Reynolds, she said with the directness only children truly master, are you going to be okay? You look worried. Reynolds knelt to her level. I am a little worried about a meeting tomorrow, but having you and your mom on my side makes me much braver. Emma considered this seriously before declaring, Mom says that when you're worried about something big, you should remember that most things look different in the morning. The simple wisdom made Reynolds smile. Your mom is very smart. I know, Emma agreed confidently. Then, with childlike intuition, she added, she likes you, too, you know. She smiles more when you're here. As Rebecca gently shooed her daughter back to bed with an embarrassed glance at Reynolds, he realized that whatever happened at tomorrow's board meeting, the most significant transformation had already occurred, not in corporate policy, but in his own heart. The man who would walk into Meridian Enterprises the next morning was fundamentally different from the isolated, driven executive who had encountered a determined 7-year-old in his lobby just a few months earlier. He just hoped that difference would be enough to win the coming battle. The Meridian Enterprises boardroom fell silent as Alexander Reynolds concluded his presentation. The evidence of Harrington's discriminatory policies lay before each board member, decades of systematic exclusion, methodically documented and impossible to deny. For 17 years, Reynolds said, his voice steady but charged with emotion, I believed I had failed my wife Caroline by being too focused on building this company. Today, I learned that the real failure was institutional, a deliberate policy designed by Mr. Harrington to eliminate working mothers from our workforce. Harrington's face had grown increasingly ashen as Reynolds revealed document after document. These are historical practices, he protested weakly. Times were different. Were they? Rebecca interrupted, standing beside Reynolds at the head of the table. Or did you simply make sure they stayed the same? She distributed additional reports showing the Family Forward Initiative's remarkable success metrics. The evidence shows that supporting working parents doesn't diminish productivity, it enhances it. James Whitfield cleared his throat. I move that we formally adopt the Family Forward Initiative as permanent company policy and that we expand it across all Meridian offices nationwide. I second, said Martina Chen, a usually quiet board member who had been watching the proceedings with growing resolve. And I further move that Gerald Harrington be removed from the board effective immediately. Harrington surged to his feet. This is preposterous. I built this company. On exclusion and prejudice, Reynolds finished for him. Times have changed, Gerald. Meridian has changed. The vote was decisive, 11-3 in favor of removing Harrington and permanently implementing the initiative. As security escorted the former CEO from the building, Reynolds felt a weight lifting, not just the immediate threat to his position, but a deeper burden he'd carried since losing Caroline and Lily. Later that afternoon, as the news of Meridian's groundbreaking new policies hit the financial press, Reynolds found himself alone in his office, staring at the photograph of Caroline and Lily. For the first time in 17 years, he spoke to them without guilt clouding his words, I think you would have approved. It took me far too long, but maybe some good has come from losing you after all. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Rebecca stood in the doorway, Emma beside her. We brought celebration cupcakes, Emma announced, holding up a box from the bakery down the street. Mom says you won the big fight. Reynolds smiled. We did, together. As Emma arranged cupcakes on his conference table with solemn concentration, Rebecca joined Reynolds by the window. What happens now? She asked quietly. Professionally, we implement the initiative nationwide, then industry-wide. I've already had calls from 3 competing firms asking for consultation. He turned to face her fully. Personally, that's a more complicated question. Rebecca's eyes held his. Is it? Reynolds took a deep breath. For 17 years, I've lived in the past, building Meridian as a monument to what I'd lost rather than as a foundation for something new. He glanced at Emma, now carefully dividing napkins. You and Emma reminded me that life continues, that there can be second chances if we're brave enough to take them. Are you? Rebecca asked softly. Brave enough? In answer, Reynolds reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wrapped package. This was Caroline's. She would have wanted someone like you to have it, someone who fights for the same things she believed in. Rebecca unwrapped the package to find a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a compass. She always said a woman needed her own direction, not one set by others, Reynolds explained. It seems fitting now. As Rebecca touched the bracelet with gentle fingers, Emma bounded over. Are you guys having a serious talk? Your faces look serious. Reynolds knelt to her level. Actually, I was wondering if you and your mom might like to help me with a new project. Emma's eyes brightened. Like the kids' space we designed? Even bigger, Reynolds smiled. I'm thinking about starting a foundation, one that helps companies create better workplaces for families. We'd need a chief testing officer to make sure our ideas actually work for kids. I could do that. Emma exclaimed. I thought you might, Reynolds agreed, looking up at Rebecca. And we'd need a brilliant executive director who understands both corporate structure and family needs. Rebecca's eyes widened. You're serious about this? Completely, Reynolds confirmed. The Reynolds Family Foundation, focused on transforming workplace culture nationwide. Reynolds Family Foundation, Emma repeated thoughtfully. Does that mean we'd be part of your family? The innocent question hung in the air, laden with meaning beyond a 7-year-old's understanding. Rebecca blushed. Emma, that's not yet, Reynolds interrupted gently, surprising himself with the words. But families come together in many different ways over time. 1 year later, to the day, the Reynolds Family Foundation celebrated its official launch in the same lobby where Emma had first approached the reception desk with her mother's portfolio. Now, hundreds of business leaders gathered to learn about implementing family-forward policies in their own companies. Alexander Reynolds stood at the podium, Rebecca beside him as executive director, and Emma proudly passing out program brochures to attendees. One unexpected visitor changed everything, Reynolds told the crowd. A 7-year-old girl taught a room full of executives what true courage looks like. He smiled at Emma, now standing between him and Rebecca. She reminded us that family isn't a liability in the workplace, it's our greatest asset and our ultimate purpose. As applause filled the atrium, Reynolds took Rebecca's hand, the silver compass bracelet catching the light as their fingers intertwined. The gold band on her left hand, a recent addition, matched the one on his. Ready for this new adventure? He asked quietly. Rebecca smiled, leaning into his shoulder as Emma wrapped her arms around them both. We've been ready since the day she walked into your lobby. Sometimes, the most important meetings of our lives come disguised as interruptions. Sometimes, our greatest opportunities arrive in unexpected packages. And sometimes, just sometimes, a child's simple courage can heal wounds we thought would last forever.